Welcome to the Cultivating Calmness Podcast. Today we are in for a good treat here with 𝗖𝗂𝗹𝗁𝗀. We are going to have a conversation about NARM. That is the Neuroaffective Relational Model. And Ricky actually talked with me and presented at a mental health professionals luncheon several months ago about this very topic. And so we wanted to have her in to share with all of you a little bit about this. But first, a little bit more about Ricky. She is an LPCC-S like myself, so a counselor supervisor. She owns and operates her own counseling agency called 𝗓𝗏𝗪 located here in Columbus. She comes from many years of counseling in different areas, such as addiction, foster care, and corrections, and finally has settled in her own private practice where she has been working with trauma and everything kind of associated with that using NARM. So without further ado, welcome, Ricky.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, thank you so much for coming in and taking the time to do this. What got you started in just counseling in general? Let's just start there.
I had applied to a seminary to be a pastor.
Okay.
My ex-husband was a pastor. We had planned to work together. And as I was getting ready to start that program, I realized that the part of it that I really wanted to do was talking with people in the congregations and seeing how they wanted to fit in the community. We have different roles that people could do, but really helping people feel more of a sense of belonging and support people in that way. And I realized there was a way to do that that was specific to that rather than, a job that could potentially include that. And so the seminary that I applied to actually also had a counseling program. So from the time that I applied and was accepted, I changed my mind. And then went into a different program. And I'm so glad that I did. I love the work that I do, and it's a very good fit.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So eventually, through all of the different kind of roles you've had in your career, you have kind of settled into private practice and you got into NARM. So can you tell us a little bit about what NARM is to begin with?
Absolutely. And I found NARM when I had been practicing for a few years. I was working in addiction treatment at the time, and I realized that there was this piece missing from my training. I didn't have anything specific in trauma. And as I was moving out into different workplaces, I'm hearing more about somatic experiencing and different trauma modalities. And I had planned to take the SE training. But then a friend of mine had already signed up for the NARM training. They happened to have one in Columbus. It had just started. I read the website and I said, well, this is exactly what I was looking for. I did not know the difference at the time between shock trauma or the classic PTSD diagnosis that exists in the DSM and complex trauma, which is what I actually work with now. So even just reading the website, I thought, well, I didn't even know this was an option, but this is the option I want. So I started that training in 2017. It went through 2018, and then I joined the training team right after that, and have been enjoying learning and relearning and deeper learning this time.
So it's my understanding that NARM is a relatively newer modality.
Yes.
So did you come in pretty early?
I did. The first training in the U.S. was in 2012. I believe they had been doing some trainings in Europe prior to that. I was in the third training in the United States, and they've had a couple, 2 or 3 every year since then. So yes, I was very early on in NARM coming to the U.S.
Okay. So yeah, there's not many people here in the U.S. then who do that.
Yes, it's definitely growing. The trainings tend to be full for the number of folks that they take each time. They have online, and usually there's one in-person option each year.
And you happened to get in on the one that was here.
I did. It was pre-COVID, and we were able to do things in person at that time. And it really felt like I just kind of stumbled into this thing that ended up being really instrumental in how I practice.
Yeah. So I guess what makes NARM different from the other like you mentioned some of them, like the treatment modalities. So like SE or EMDR or IFS or like some of these other treatments that also work on trauma.
So it's an integrative model. It pulls from a lot of things that were already existing and just kind of organizes them in a different way. We use some traditional talk therapy techniques, but we also can incorporate somatic techniques as well. And it bridges the gap between those two things and works with them at whatever level the client feels comfortable. So we don't have to try to get people into their bodies to be able to do this kind of work. It's like whatever they have available is what we're going to work with. We trust that more information becomes available to folks through the work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is it, I guess, about... Can you tell us a little bit about NARM specifically, how it works, and just some of those like unique features about it?
Absolutely.
That differentiate it from some of these other practices?
And I will say that I'm not trained in anything else.
That's fair. But yeah, you probably have some knowledge of how other things are.
Yeah, and I may get some of the other things wrong because it's just like my perception based on whatever. It's like very third-hand information.
That's fair.
Yeah. But so with NARM, we always start with what it is the client's wanting for themselves.
Okay.
Which sounds very simple, but you probably know often people come into therapy and they don't actually know what they're wanting.
Where it's like, I want to feel better.
Right. Yes. So we can talk about what better means, what have things been like that have not been better? And we're looking for a kind of a state, we wouldn't focus on a behavior so much, although behaviors are good information. Like I keep doing this thing. I don't like that I'm doing this thing, but I can't seem to stop. And so then we really look at what is driving that. And that's using all of that information that we talked about. So it might be thoughts or belief patterns, emotional things that come up. Sometimes those things don't match, which is exactly what we're looking for. Or like those somatic cues, like when I feel anxious, I often I'll feel it in my stomach, or I get shaky, or whatever comes up for the client. We're going to talk about, and then how those things relate to each other. Some of the ways that NARM seems pretty special to me is a focus on agency, and not agency. It's different from like doing. Sometimes agency means I'm choosing not to do something. Sometimes it's just like I'm not beating myself up for this thing that I've always done, or this new thing that I want to do. That part gets very nuanced and a little bit complicated.
Yeah.
But it's a key component to NARM therapy. One of the things that I love, I was thinking about this on my way in today. I love how we hold, I have this intellectual awareness that, whatever, fill in the blank. I know that I'm not a terrible person, but when this happens, I really shame myself. I beat myself up. And a lot of times we can't see those things by ourselves.
Right.
Our brains like to keep this information like siloed, and we can know one or we can know the other, but having somebody else sitting with us to say, oh, I noticed that both of these things are going on at the same time. How is it to be aware of that? And even just holding both of those things, I think what's happening is it starts to build new connections in the brain, like the different sides of the brain start communicating differently. And it's amazing to see how, in a safe relationship or a safe environment, that just being able to see those two things at the same time can start to soften them a bit. I remember my first experience with NARM, and I was processing some grief about my grandmother, and I, by the end of that hour, experienced grief in a whole new way. And to be fair, I was ready for it. I was ripe for this work, and even that 1 hour changed how I experience myself, how I experience some significant parts of life. It's not that way for everybody, and it's not that way for me every time in every session. But I was bought in. That one experience, I said, "Oh my gosh, this is a game changer."
Yeah. So did you get that therapy session as part of the training, or was that okay?
Yeah. So and I think some of the like EMDR, I think does this, and somatic experiencing, those experiential kind of practices where we're not technically doing therapy in the training, but when you're going through this process, even like from an educational perspective and talking about what's happening in the process, those therapeutic things can happen. So it isn't necessarily the point of what we're doing, because we're really trying to understand like what it is that we're asking of clients and what it is like to be in that position as a client.
Right.
And I think this is true of therapy in general, and I know it to be true of NARM. It's hard to really get it if you haven't felt it, because it's not just an intellectual exercise. I can tell somebody, like I just said, that I had this, hour-long, essentially conversation with somebody, and my life changed after that. Like I can hear those words, like I can understand it, but to really get it is more the feeling. And how do you communicate human experience fully with words?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. EMDR does do that.
Yeah.
Not really like deep therapy, but you're trying it. You're noticing what that feels like.
Right.
So I'm trained in EMDR, so I don't have the NARM training, the other stuff. So just, a different one from you.
Yeah.
So you say you work with more complex trauma, and that NARM is helpful for complex trauma.
Right.
Is it helpful for just any trauma, or is it really working with that complex?
It's really for the complex trauma. So relational, developmental, attachment trauma, those things. I really am glad that that is getting more attention even within the field of mental health. We've really focused a lot on shock trauma historically. So NARM is not really made for shock trauma,
Okay.
but it is nice in conjunction with things that are made for shock trauma, because most shock trauma has some relational component to it as well. And so to be able to use those both is really wonderful. I personally am not trained in shock trauma. That's like the next thing on my list. But then I keep doing the NARM trainings, and that's a way fitting it in. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We don't all have to be good at everything. And I think it's good to have like a niche that people can come to you specifically
Yes.
for that.
Yeah.
So can you talk, I guess, a little bit, well, one, for people who don't really understand what the difference is between shock trauma and complex trauma.
Yes.
Can you give us a little statement about that?
This is one of those things that I heard it, over and over and over. I heard it many times, and like my brain just did not want to hold the information, or it just wasn't sticking. But the main distinction is shame. So in that shock trauma process, people are feeling fear. They're feeling, lots of things usually in their body. When shame becomes a part of that process, we can pretty well guess that there is some relational trauma in there as well.
Okay, so like complex trauma is adding in the relational piece.
Right.
And oftentimes like complex trauma is viewed as, I wouldn't say lifelong, but more like something that has built on top of, many things that build on top of each other over time, versus shock trauma is usually like maybe one experience,
right,
one event.
Yeah, it can happen certainly more than once, and the more there is, the worse it's probably going to feel. One of the things that I think is really interesting, I think there were studies done that showed that if people had earlier relational trauma, they're more likely to be traumatized by events. Or like the earlier childhood trauma increases the risk of trauma down the road, because it has to do with basically how our brains process the information. And if there's wounding earlier on, it makes sense that it would be more wounding later if that stuff is unresolved.
Right.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think is really important to know about complex trauma and the relational stuff is that some of it is very subtle. Things that are not only like culturally acceptable, but sometimes culturally celebrated, that actually impact how we experience ourselves. And so I remember my first job working as a therapist, I'd say about half of the people coming through the program would say that they had trauma, and half of them would say, yeah, my childhood was fine. What I've learned is that like nobody makes it through childhood and is just fine. Like literally no one. Right. And so it really broadened my understanding of what trauma is. And there's some pushback on that in the field. Like, if we call all of these things trauma, are we diminishing somebody else's experience? I don't think so. I think we're actually really limiting things if we don't broaden that definition, and then we're left with our suffering and feeling like there's nothing we can do with it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. I think I tend to make the joke that people will come in and say they don't have any trauma identified, and I'm like, well, I'll find it. We'll find it, right? But it's unique to that individual, right? So if one person's trauma is not another person's trauma, and that's a big conversation that I know I have to have with people, because you get those like, well, I know so-and-so has it much worse than me. Right? Like, that may be true. And that doesn't mean that your life isn't hard based on what you've experienced.
Right.
One person's bullying is not another person's bullying. And that's why two different people can walk away from the same event having a totally different experience.
Absolutely.
So I'm with you on that. And I feel like, everybody has some kind of trauma. It's just going to be different in how they were brought up, how it was treated, how they got help or didn't get help, and all kinds of factors. We can't just say one thing. Yeah. Okay. Well, so what would you say are like the core principles like that are key to NARM?
So in the practice of it, I would say that consent is huge. When we talk about what the client's wanting for themselves, I let them know, like, if we start down this road and you say, you know what, I don't actually want to go there, then that's fine. I'm totally okay with that. Like, saying yes now does not mean saying yes forever. And that focus on the agency, even within the process, is huge. So the consent piece is big. The client's agency is part of that, and the relational component of therapy. How do we do therapy with somebody if we don't feel safe enough? In my office, we've really focused on hospitality and, snacks and drinks for folks, and, trying our best to help people feel comfortable. So that if we're not safe on the outside, how are we going to feel safe on the inside?
Right.
Although with trauma, sometimes we're not safe on the outside, but that feels very familiar and comfortable. Yeah, I'm sure there are more, but those are the ones off the top of my head.
Yeah. So we know that this can work with the complex trauma because it's relational, and that's what a lot of the in the title of NARM is, that relational piece. What is it about the relational piece that is like being worked on, I guess?
Yeah, and I remember hearing somebody say, and I'm sure millions of people have said it, but I don't think this is specific to NARM, is that we're wounded in relationship and we heal in relationship. And I just love that sentiment. There are some things we can kind of work through on our own and make sense of and feel different. But having that supportive dynamic, there are some things we can't do on our own. Like, we can't tell when we're holding these things that don't really fit together, but like when it's in our heads, like, they're just going to stay not fitting. So having that other person to be able to, reflect things back and offer a different perspective. Okay, so another piece of it is that we really value relational repair. So if a client says, hey, you said that thing and that did not feel good to me, I want to be able to work through it as much as possible. And it means a lot to me, actually, when clients feel brave enough to say, hey, that didn't feel good to me, because even that is a huge step for a lot of people. So it's really it isn't so much about trying to do everything perfectly and perfectly attuned to the client.
Right.
That is an unreasonable expectation, because we are, even as therapists, just human. And things are just not going to land well sometimes, even if we have the best of intentions. So having that space and that safety to be able to say, like, this didn't feel so good for me, or I didn't like how that went. Like, I really see it as a collaborative process, and that requires both of us to be able to show up. And actually, this is a pretty important principle of NARM too, is through the training, we really focus a lot on the therapist process. We talk about countertransference, like, what do we get triggered about, working through that so that we can be more present with clients, but also just so we can have our own more safe and more comfortable experience. Like, from an educational perspective, this was drastically different for most of my other educational experiences. I actually worked through a lot of my own educational trauma of that, like doing something in front of people, like practicing in front of a group. And I remember, growing up and having to do class presentations and all of that. To be able to even do those things in a safe place was really reparative.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're not like back to the therapeutic piece of
Right.
it isn't just about having a perfect relationship. It's how do we talk about these things and process it? What's getting triggered with each of us relationally in this process. And I'm not going to tell my clients like you did this thing and it was triggering to me. I'm going to say, hey, person that I consult with, I got triggered in session and I don't want to work through that. Yeah, so there's just support in all of these different directions.
Right. When somebody comes in with, diagnoses, as they do when they come to see us, anxiety, depression, PTSD, etc. How does NARM and how do you use NARM to address the symptoms and the things they're coming in with?
So a lot of times what's happening is folks come in and they say, I have these symptoms or I have this diagnosis and I want to feel better. And so we look at the specific things that they have going on. And if that specific thing were different, like what would that be like for you? This is the part of the what do you want for yourself? And then we take a look at what the symptoms are. And, we use the different techniques to like listen to the signals that our body or emotions or our minds are giving. To see if that makes sense in our current life, or is that something from a long time ago that we still carry. So it is like if we're talking and then like it's a non-diagnostic model.
Okay.
So we talk about the different survival strategies that people have. It's basically like developmental stages. Kind of loosely defined. Like there is a timeline, but it's not as cut and dry as that because one developmental stage leads into the next. And so it is thinking about like the Enneagram where these are like distinct categories. Like it looks kind of like that, but it isn't really like that. That's just an easier way to teach than to say we have all these things and they mix together. Yeah, it's like we learn the different stages and then we understand the nuance of it. That said, a lot of the clients that I get are in that kind of neurodivergent realm. I work with a lot of folks who have autism and ADHD, bipolar disorders, borderline personality. Like that is my favorite. I don't like that group of things.
Yeah.
I do a lot of that kind of work. But like I said, NARM is not really designed for PTSD. It's also not great for active psychosis because of the agency piece. Like if somebody isn't reasonably like grounded in reality, then it's not going to be as effective.
Right.
Even though we can use still a lot of the principles about consent and looking at agency.
Yeah. So the agency piece is where it's what do you want to do with this? What are you trying to get out of it? And is that a session to session thing? Whereas like, so EMDR, it's like, I want to work on this car accident or something that I experienced. So we may start in a session, but if we don't finish, we're going to pick that back up the next session. We're not going to be like, well, we didn't finish, but where are we today?
Yeah.
That's an option, I guess, but it's not, as recommended.
Yeah, that makes sense. So NARM you can do however the person wants to handle it, and I let people know that on the front end. We may talk about the exact same thing every time you come to see me. That's okay with me. Sometimes people worry about me getting bored. And so far that's not been an issue. Or, it may be different from one time to the next, and that's totally fine too. I do notice that, some of the folks that I worked with, we worked together for years, and there are these common themes that come up. And really, like, we're all human beings, and so there are common themes even from one person to the next. We all generally want more internal quiet and peace and a sense of our freedom, and, we have more connection with people. That is a lot of the work that I do.
Yeah. So it does sound like you're really trying to take a moment that they can recognize or bring to session, whatever that is, whether it's a present or a past experience, then you're kind of taking that and saying, well, what do you want to feel? Where do you want to be?
Right.
Where are we now? And you're trying to bring those two kind of together then and into a better place.
Yeah, sometimes they come together. And sometimes we find that what we're wanting for ourselves maybe isn't available or isn't even what we want anymore. We've just believed that we've wanted that, and now we're going in a different direction. So sometimes, we're kind of softening the things that get in the way of what we want, and sometimes it's like processing the grief or the anger, the frustration about like what I want really isn't available to me.
Mm-hmm. So you said you really like the like borderline bipolar. I say I worked in inpatient when I first started, so we did see a lot of those diagnoses, usually the extreme versions because they've been hospitalized. So I definitely have a insight into what that might be like. As far as like in a private practice setting, I don't see many people that come in with that diagnosis currently. So what makes those clientele unique for you, and why do you feel like you like resonate with them, especially like using NARM with them?
Yeah, so some of it has to do with the particular survival styles. It's like some of these themes show up in for folks who end up with those diagnoses, those themes are a part of it. And some of them are familiar for me, like it's stuff that I have experienced myself. And so I have some of that like personal familiarity with it. I also worked, like you said, I worked in addiction treatment. And so these were really common there. And so like I just have so much compassion for the struggles of all of that and can relate to it on a personal level. And I have some sense of what it's like for those things to start to soften and how different life can feel. And feeling more aliveness and more like being in charge of myself and not just like at the whim of whatever the environment is doing. And so those are all near and dear to my heart.
Yeah. So I don't know, this question just kind of came to me, but do you know much about DBT?
I know a bit, yeah.
So a lot of times DBT is recommended for like borderline personality disorder. So, where do you see some of those, like the differences in between, like how you would treat with NARM versus how they may treat with DBT?
And my understanding of DBT is that a lot of the skills help to create a state change. So I'm going to do these things and then I'm going to feel different. And NARM is not so much about doing, but it's like how we're relating to our experience and we're building that internal capacity to self-regulate. So I really like working with clients who have a background in DBT because I know they have some skills for regulation. I think it and NARM work really well together. And I'm not trained in DBT, so it's nice when they've picked things up other places that they can also use. I don't think that they're like opposed to each other. I think they can work well together.
Yeah, so yours is more of like the emotional, physical, like aspects, whereas I think DBT, and I'm not trained in DBT either. So that I think it's also there's that piece of it that's I can hold two things to be true at once,
and that is a big part of NARM. Yeah,
okay. So that's how that would relate as you want.
Huh? Yeah, and then when we're holding both of those things, I don't know if they do this in DBT. As we're holding both of those things, then we also pay attention to what happens when we're holding both of those things. It's not just that I can, it's like, what is that experience like? And then some of the other strategies will start to kick in. And, people will lean more toward this thing or that thing, of the two that they're holding. And how is it to notice that? Often the one that people go toward in that moment is the more like shaming or blaming stuff. And so then we can talk about, well, what's it like to be present with both of these things and then to feel that like pull toward this familiar path. And do you want to go down that path? Like, is that helping you in some way? And in NARM, we're not trying to like eradicate any of that. We're not trying to extinguish anything, but really give ourselves more options. Because all that stuff that helped us survive may be necessary at some point. And for a lot of people, there's a fear of like, what if I can't do that anymore?
Right.
But when we're in this more healed place, it's like we have access still to our survival stuff.
Right.
That's not going to go.
That where our survival isn't overactive. And I think that's what we
Exactly.
experience with our clients is that it's hyperactive, not in the attention piece, hyperactivity piece, but just that I'm overreactive to stimuli. So when somebody talks to me with a certain tone, I am immediately reactive to it versus I can differentiate between that tone and a slightly different tone.
Yes. Yeah, I can stay more in that curious place of, oh, I noticed that their tone is like this, and I don't necessarily immediately jump to a specific interpretation. Because a lot of times when we have those specific interpretations, it's like, that's the go-to.
Yep.
No matter what's going on, my brain says, you mean this, because that's what's familiar to me. That's what I was told this tone means.
And then that's how we determine like safety, right? Is it safe? So I know how to keep myself safe by interpreting your tone this way. So are there specific like techniques that you use within NARM that are helpful with some of this like integration that we've been kind of talking about?
Yes. And there's a whole year-long training. Because there are so many. And like each of the interventions is, its own technique. And it's like we learn the different interventions, but then like the maybe more difficult thing is learning like when to use what. Yeah. But we're also not necessarily shooting for perfection because however a person responds to what I say is going to be really good information for the process. As far as like more like a DBT kind of techniques, it's really, there aren't like exercises that we do. I don't assign homework ever. And now a part of that is like homework as a part of NARM. Some of it is like my own educational stuff. Or like I refuse. I won't do it.
Yeah, so the specific, I guess, techniques are more like ways you would ask questions and how you interpret information. It's not necessarily like a homework sheet or a type of strategy or like eye movements or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Now, and we're not like asking people to do particular eye movements, but I do pay attention to how people's eyes are moving. One of my favorite therapy moments is when people are processing something and they see their eyes moving around because I'm imagining that that's like accessing different parts of their brain. And it's just, I find it all to be very fascinating and just like how we work and how we heal. And, I believe that we are like self-organizing. We are self-healing systems that our nervous systems want to go in that direction. And so with support, it makes it a little easier to go in that direction. And so it is just the best thing maybe in the world to sit with somebody while that's happening. It makes me emotional.
So yeah, like there's no like training or anything on like the eye, like the movement of the eyes within NARM, but that's just something you've personally noticed and feel like kind of drawn to and curious about.
Yeah, we talk about like all the nervous system stuff and how, we use our eyes for different things and we're tracking what's going on and when things are changing in a person's nervous system and you changes of expression or like the energy in their voice or like we talk and we joke in the training about the NARM sweats. It's like when you're processing something and all of a sudden like, oh my gosh, it's so hot in here. That's a thing just to expect.
Okay. Yeah. Have you heard of brain spotting?
I have heard of it. Yeah.
So that may be something that's interesting to, just to add more trainings to her.
Right. I would love to experience it as a client, actually. It sounds very fascinating.
Yeah, we had somebody present on, Mandy Pearson presented on that a couple months ago, I think. And it is pretty interesting just to know. And I think based on what you're telling me about NARM, I think that would be probably something that could potentially go, join with NARM.
Yeah. I am so fascinated by things like brain spotting and EMDR. Like, how did somebody figure that out? Right. And I know it's a thing that develops over time.
Do you know the story behind it?
Yeah, and I would love to hear.
I don't remember if there's one for brain spotting. There probably is, but with EMDR, what is her name? Shapiro is the last name. I guess the story was she was walking along like a path, along the lake, and she noticed, like she was like thinking about something, and she was like kind of scanning, like in front of her, like this back and forth. And as she did that, noticed that she was like calming down, like settling him. And so I guess that's like the story of how it started, was she was realized that she was processing, and in the movement of her eyes, that she had actually like sped up or helped in that processing. And then it kind of went from that.
That's incredible. I love human curiosity.
Yeah. Right.
And noticing. Yeah.
So, like, I think there's lots of modalities that can go hand in hand where you don't have to do just like one solid thing. So I know you're trained in NARM, and you said like that's kind of the only big thing like you're trained in. I think many clinicians, I don't know, I can't say for you, but like we're all trained in CBT, like we have like the basis. But do you find that you like do things other than NARM with clients?
It only a very little bit on purpose. I'm sure I know that I do things that are outside of NARM. And this is kind of like in my pre-NARM life, that question people ask all the time is, what kind of therapy do you do? And, when you're going to a job interview, usually job interviews, and I would say that it was eclectic, but I think it was really more intuitive, because it wasn't like I was intentionally pulling from different modalities. I was just doing what made sense to me at the time, and that I wasn't trained in anything specific in grad school. It was like a big intro class.
Yeah.
And I had, like 2 classes where we actually did anything that was really like therapy. We did some role play stuff outside of that. So I got some specific training in group therapy, but it was, just from that professor's perspective. So anyway, when I found NARM, I'm like, oh, this is a thing I can do on purpose. And it was so aligned with how I was practicing intuitively, but it gave me some structure, and like I could really look at my own stuff and how that might be influencing what I'm doing that might not be so helpful for clients. So I've worked professionally, like a lot of colleagues of mine use somatic experiencing. And so I've picked up just some of their stuff for self-regulation, which is really helpful when it seems like there might be some shock trauma stuff coming up for the clients that I work with. I don't imagine that it'll ever be something that I do. Like, I'm not going to ever advertise that I work with shock trauma, because it's just not the thing that I want to do. But I do think it's nice to have some skills to help folks when that stuff comes up.
Right.
If it seems like that's mostly what they're coming in for, then I'll refer them to somebody who's trained in that.
Yeah. That's where it's good to help, to have those knowledge of certain aspects of things, but maybe I don't need a whole, super long training on it. Right. Yeah. Are there what are your favorite parts, I guess, of NARM? I don't think I've asked that, or you said that.
My favorite parts, that's a good question. I love the consent piece. I have been on the client end. I've been in some therapy where it seemed like the therapist had an agenda, like they were trying to get me somewhere, and that did not feel good to me. Like, it was very clear to me that there's something that they're thinking should happen that I'm not comfortable with. And I even had an experience where I tried to bring that up relationally, and it didn't go well. So like, okay, I don't want to do that. Kind of do that to folks. And so that relational consent piece and the agency is so important to me. I'm not here to try to make people do something. Like, if everybody functioned like me, the world would fall apart. I know this, and I'm okay with that. I can be a part of the whole, and that's great. But really, it's like seeing people experience life in a different way, but also feeling the kind of connection that comes with like holding that space for folks, and like the amount of trust that it takes to cry in front of someone or even just have an emotion in front of someone. It's incredible to me.
Yeah.
So I guess it's like the experience of therapy and the experience of NARM is my favorite thing.
Yeah. And it sounds like just the people being willing to open up to you and trust you.
Yeah.
With these really vulnerable and private pieces of their life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any like last like things that you feel like are super important to share about NARM that I haven't asked about?
It's a great model for therapy and it's an incredible training.
How long is the training?
So it is 3 modules. I want to say that they have different levels of the training. Level 1 is more like just education, theory based. I don't think you have to be a practicing therapist or in school to be a therapist for level 1. Level 2 is the clinical training. So it is for people who are either in a master's program or who have a master's degree in a therapy related field. Level 3 is their master's training, and that is more focused on the therapist process. And we get into some of the like personality disorder dynamics. And again, non-pathologizing, we talk about all of that, like every diagnosis, all of those experiences, really it's a spectrum. And we have many traits of many things. We just happen to categorize things in a particular way.
Yeah.
And then the level 4 is kind of an ongoing, do as much as you want of it thing. And that's with the developer of the model, 𝗏𝘂𝗶𝘀𝗀. In the US, the lead trainer is 𝗏𝘂𝗶𝘀𝗀. They have very different teaching styles, and it's really cool to see how they handle different things. But so the level 2 training, which is what a lot of people will start with as therapists, they do 4 modules. I want to say they're Wednesday to Sunday each time, and it's all within the calendar year. It's like a 9-month span. And then they have consultations and things that you do in addition to the more kind of classroom stuff to get certified. You can take the training and not get certified, but to get the certificate, you do the extra stuff. Yeah. And it's invaluable.
Yeah.
We can call it extra stuff, but it is so supportive of the learning. Which meant a lot to me because I've taken some trainings where to get certified, you like take this test that you can take as many times as you need to, but pay this fee. And like the certification really wasn't much, but this actually is of value to the students. And I appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've done all 4?
I have done the first 3 and I've assisted in the first 3. I did like 1 or 2 of the level 4. For the sake of time, because I'm also assisting, like I haven't done much of the level 4, but my youngest graduates next year from high school, and then
my schedule, and you'll have more time.
I'm gonna do some more trainings.
Yeah. So it sounds like if you're a clinician, like your eye, you don't have to do level 1.
Correct.
And then level 2 is a series of like 5-day intensive trainings within a like 9-month period or something like that. Yeah. All right. So pretty a fairly large investment, I would say, like time specifically.
Yeah.
But you feel well worth it.
Absolutely.
And if you were to get training here, like in the United States, you would be one of not a lot of people.
It's really, yeah. So it's not a huge amount.
And more of a unique, like a niche. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but in like Ohio or even just the Columbus area, are there many NARM?
There are some, and in part because we did have that one training actually in town.
Right.
And I think there were like 30 or 40 people in that cohort, but they weren't all from Central Ohio. You know, some people came from out of town. There are a fair number, like it's kind of a surprising number of NARM therapists in Ohio, a handful here locally.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, I guess 30 people for state of Ohio or surrounding area seems like a lot, but when you spread it out in the state, right, there's probably not many of you here, even in Central Ohio.
No.
Where like you looked up EMDR in Central Ohio, you would have
Are there a lot?
So this is a newer and upcoming, training or specifically complex trauma.
Yes.
So it may be something that could interest those clinicians that are wanting
Absolutely.
to do more in that area.
Absolutely. And I'm always happy to answer questions about the training and have conversations with folks about NARM. I love it.
I can tell you seem very passionate about it.
I really am. It's been a game changer for me clinically, and has really added a lot to my life. As a the Hair Club for Men. I'm not only the president, I'm also a member. But yeah, it's been helpful in my own therapy.
Well, I thank you so much for coming in today and asking about this and presenting, several months ago. I know that can be daunting and for some people.
No, and it was really lovely. I really appreciated how you had that set up so that we could just chat and everybody get to know each other and answer questions. And
yeah. Well, I really enjoyed this, and I hope that anybody listening, may consider either getting some NARM therapy from you or consider getting training in NARM.
Absolutely.
And we'll have all of your information in the links below.
Thank you.
People can reach out to you if they need to as well.
Sounds good.
Thank you.